was once a time when the battle for the best screen, it wasn't between OLEDs or mini LEDs, but two absolute legends, Pioneer's Kuro and Panasonic's Pro Plasma. And if you were around back then, you know which one you owned said a lot about you. The Kuro, it had the cult following, you know, that message board fame. But for the pros, the calibrators, the installers, the ones chasing perfect color and contrast, Panasonic was it. Fast forward to today, and Panasonic is back to reclaim that crown, not with the Plasma, but with something that feels like its spiritual successor, the Z95B OLED. But this isn't just any OLED. The Z is built around a primary RGB tandem OLED design sourced from LG that essentially stacks multiple OLED layers on top of each other to achieve greater brightness, richer colors, and a longer lifespan, whereas traditional OLEDs use a single light-emitting layer to handle all color and brightness. Now, this new tandem approach represents a big step in efficiency and performance. The Panasonic Z95B, shown here in 65 inches, is only available in a limited number of sizes, 55, 65, and 77. Now, most OLEDs are all about being razor thin, but this one, it's thick. We're talking over 2 inches all the way around. Thicker than Hisense's 116-inch U7 Mini LED, if you can believe that. At first glance, it honestly looks a little bit more like an early edge-lit LED from a decade ago than something you would expect to see in 2025. But, and this is important, that extra depth actually allows for better internal cooling, which means the panel doesn't have to rely so heavily on auto brightness limiting, or ABL. It also meant that there was room to include a proper sound system. So instead of the usual, crappy TV speakers and tin can audio, the Z95B actually sounds pretty good. Speaking of the built-in TV speakers, the Technic system can sound shockingly good. You can do more to adjust the sound of this television than any TV I've seen. With the right adjustments, it's possible to achieve soundbar levels of intelligibility and spaciousness. Just don't expect Sonos or Samsung level bass. The good news is that between the auto setup and room correction options, yeah, it has those too, and the ability to make manual adjustments on top of that, I'm confident you will find a sound you like, making the Z95B perhaps the first TV I've reviewed that doesn't get my automatic recommendation to at least add a soundbar. If you want the most accurate and enjoyable picture on the Panasonic Z95B right out of the box, just put the TV into its filmmaker mode and do it immediately. This is where the TV really comes alive. Without any calibration, filmmaker mode nailed accuracy with delta E's of 2 for both grayscale and color, and brightness is very respectable at around 700 nits. That's bright, accurate, and just ready to go right out of the box. Now, by default, the Z95B powers on in its normal picture mode, which, not surprisingly, is the worst of all the profiles. I measured delta E of 15 and 16. That is way off, and brightness topped out at only 222 nits. Even switching to the cinema preset did not help much. Accuracy improved, a little bit with delta E's of 9 and 11, but brightness dropped even further to around 208 nits. Then there's True Cinema. On paper, it is the most accurate of them all. Using my calibrated light meter, pattern generator, and CalMAN software, delta E's were around 1.5, practically perfect. But here's the catch. The True Cinema profile is so dim. I measured just 89 nits, which is worse or darker than some projectors. So unless you're watching in a completely blacked out room, this profile is going to look too dull for most people. Bottom line, filmmaker mode gives you the best balance of bright, punchy, and impressively accurate picture. No calibration required. But speaking of calibration, I did use the True Cinema setting as a benchmark, and I set about calibrating the Z95B's Professional 1 picture profile to see if I could get even better results. Post-calibration, I achieved slightly better grayscale and color accuracy figures, but not by much, with average margin of errors, or delta E's, of 1 for both. That said, I did manage to eke out quite a bit more light, with peaks hitting 916 nits. Speaking of nits, let's talk about brightness for a second. I've already mentioned that out of the box, the Z is dim. However, by adjusting the brightness settings in the menus, even maxing them out, you can achieve dramatically better results. In fact, this is the brightest OLED I've tested this year, and by a wide margin. Granted, I have not tested LG's G5, which uses similar panel tech to the Z95B. Still, these results are impressive. Now, while the Z may be 1,000 nits brighter than some of its competition, let's go over its specific nit figures. In standard dynamic range, tests max out windowed, that's 10%, at 2200 nits, with full screen results settling in around 300. Dolby Vision tests, again, hit that 2200 nit mark, again, windowed, that's a little area. In full screen, though, it was brighter at 322 nits. Now, I was ultimately happy with the overall results that I achieved after calibration, with peaks hovering around 1,000 nits and full screen brightness coming in just below 300 nits sustained. But let's be real, the only person who has to like the look of a picture profile is you. So if you prefer this TV's normal or dynamic profiles to the more accurate filmmaker, you do you. For me, the Z's filmmaker profile has one of the best, most natural images I have ever seen. When viewing 4K content in either standard dynamic range or Dolby Vision, I'm not sure it gets better than what the Panasonic dishes out. Movies like F1 in Ambulance in 4K, masterclasses in what quality home cinema transfers are supposed to look like. Primary colors, skin tones, detail, sharpness, even motion were bang on, and I mean bang on. For a 65-inch display, the Panasonic had my full attention. It has something no OLED up until this point has had, and that's real specular highlights and overall light contrast on par with bright mini LED TVs, only with the perfect contrast and color you get with OLED. In many ways, the Z95B, it feels like a hybrid of sorts, and it's the first OLED display that has entirely satisfied my expectations for brightness when viewing HDR content, specifically Dolby Vision. This was particularly evident during my torture test with Jurassic Park Rebirth. I enjoyed every moment of watching modern 4K content through the Z. And I was truly impressed by the Panasonic when it came to upscaling HD signals to 4K. Watching Titanic in HD looked stunning, and I actually preferred the scaled image through the Panasonic over the 4K remaster. While the remaster is sharper, I found it to be less filmic. My HD transfer of Titanic played back through the Xidu media player and fed into the Z95B looked more natural rather than, overly smooth or AI enhanced. And then I fired up Driven, which even in HD is not a good transfer, yet I don't think it's ever looked better. I mean it, I laughed out loud at how naturally sharp the film looked played back through the Z95B. Playing the same scenes from Driven back through the TCL QM9K, a mini LED we also have in for review, was a markedly different experience with weaker saturation in skin tones and a softer, less contrasty overall appearance despite both displays being calibrated to the same standards. That said, turning on Panasonic's AI enhancements wrecked the fidelity of the otherwise natural-looking upscaled imagery and taxed the Z's so-called Pro processor to such a degree that motion also suffered. Which is a great segue to this TV's motion handling. When fed native 4K and even HD content, motion was good when viewing cinematic 24p content, and it improved as frame rates increased. However, when watching live broadcast content, specifically sports, which is often broadcast in HD and is also heavily compressed, motion could suffer. The Panasonic wasn't any worse than what I've observed from the competition, but I don't want to give you the false impression that when it comes to motion, this Panasonic is a miracle worker. I still enjoyed watching sports, but I did observe occasional stuttering during sports broadcasts. Motion was better when gaming, at least when playing story-based games like The Last of Us or slower sports games like PGA Tour. As good as this TV is, my biggest gripe is the OS. Amazon's Fire TV is the Cybertruck of operating systems. I didn't know it could get worse than Tizen, but Fire TV has me singing a different tune. Even with a gigabit internet connection, Fire TV is slow and riddled with ads. While bloatware is nothing new, the ads here are disguised as content. The other day, I clicked on what I thought was a new movie starring Adam Scott from Parks and Rec, only to discover it was a damn Volvo commercial. And these sleight-of-hand marketing tactics are all over this operating system, which no doubt contributes to this TV's sluggish response to virtually any command. Even simple actions like powering on, adjusting the volume, and input selection happen at a snail's pace, made worse by one of the most directional remote controls in the business. While I applaud Panasonic for giving users more control than any TV has to date, sometimes choice and control can be paralyzing, and in the case of the Z95B, it can also be confusing. If this is your first experience with a Panasonic TV, you may be surprised by the learning curve if even other TVs have felt like second nature. I would skip the internal OS and use just about anything else. Thankfully, you can connect anything else because this TV has 4 HDMI inputs, which meant I was able to connect an Apple TV for a better user experience and game on my PS5. HDMI inputs, however, are split between 2.1 and 2.0, so if you decide not to use the TV's built-in speakers, you only have one spare 2.1 port, as the second is shared with the Z's ARC-E-ARC input. Now, this isn't entirely uncommon, but gamers who own more than one console, you're gonna have to play the old swisheroo game, otherwise at least half of the time. You'll be missing out on important gaming features like refresh rates up to 144 Hz in 4K, for at least one of your consoles. But that nuisance aside, all 4 HDMI inputs support signals up to 4K 60 in standard definition, as well as HDR, including Dolby Vision, HDR10+, and HLG. While motion handling and gaming were good, I occasionally noticed a strobing effect on this TV. Anytime I chased peak brightness or used certain frame interpolation settings or the TV's AI picture modes, there was a subtle strobing effect, especially in the brighter areas of an image. If you're content with keeping the Z95B's brightness from reaching its absolute peak and you don't rely on motion smoothing or other frame interpolation settings, you likely won't run into this anomaly. That said, if you like the ultra-smooth soap opera look or you want to enjoy every single nit you've paid for, you may encounter this issue. One thing is for sure, if the Panasonic is on your list, be prepared to spend. As far as reference grade OLEDs go, this is one of the most expensive options on the market. I'm a little surprised that Panasonic came to the North American market with only 3 sizes to choose from, with the largest being offered at 77 inches, especially with the trend towards larger displays. Those wanting, that truly larger-than-life experience, you're just going to have to look elsewhere. But if the 77-inch is more than enough for your needs, its retail price of $4,300 is nearly $1,000 more than the comparable LG G5. Want something bigger? You can actually score an 83-inch G5 for what the 77-inch Panasonic will cost you. Then there's the Hisense U7, which I know it's not an OLED. Still, its current sale price of less than $2,500, the 100-inch is really hard to pass up, especially for such an impressive image. But when it comes to other 65-inch OLEDs I've reviewed this year, the Panasonic's image is the best. Now, I know, again, I have not reviewed the LG G5. Compared to the LG C5, Sony Bravia 8 II, and Samsung S95F, the Z leads the pack when it comes to image quality, accuracy out of the box, and overall brightness. Now, that isn't to say that everyone will agree. There's more to a TV than picture quality. For ease of use, some people may prefer Sony's operating system and less invasive AI enhancements, just like some of you may prefer LG's ultra-thin profile, whereas others may prioritize Samsung's glare-free matte surface. But no matter which camp you fall in, the Z95B is a brilliant TV, with hands down one of the best pictures I've seen in a long time. It's just held back by an inferior operating system and a user experience that doesn't always measure up to its premium price tag. I have a sinking suspicion that just like the Pro Plasma fans back in the day, once you have the Z95B dialed in, I think you're going to find yourself forgetting about all of its shortcomings and enjoying arguably the best OLED available today. So that's it. Panasonic is back, baby. What do you guys think? First of all, how many of you had Panasonic Pro Plasmas back in the day? I had two myself. Sound off. What do we think of this TV? Game changer or Fire TV? Poo-poo. I want to know. Let's get the conversation started. Can you tell I'm really excited about this TV? I can. Anyway, at the end of the day, remember, the only person who has to like the sound of your system, or this being a TV review, the sight of it, is you. So happy watching. Thank you for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next video. Bye.